A teenage boy sat silently in his seat near the front of the plane, his first-class ticket clenched in hand. He said nothing to the other passengers, just quietly adjusted his hoodie and scrolled through his phone. But that didn't matter to the flight attendant. One look at his clothes and she rolled her eyes, assuming he didn't belong. Within seconds, without even checking his story, she struck him, right there, in front of everyone. What she failed to realize was that the man sitting just 3 rows behind wasn't just another businessman in a tailored suit. He was the boy's father and the founder of the airline itself. But before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where in the world you're watching from. And if you love emotional stories with powerful lessons, don't forget to subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss a single one. He was just 16, sitting quietly by the boarding gate at Atlantic Terminal with his caretaker, a gentle, soft-spoken woman named Nora, who had been with his family since he was a toddler. The boy, Micah, wore a slate-gray hoodie, well-worn sneakers, and simple jeans. He kept his head low, his eyes fixed on his screen as he waited for the boarding call. Outwardly calm, but inside, his stomach was tight with nerves. Micah had always flown on private jets or beside his father, but this was different. This was his first flight without his parents, just him and Nora, seated in first class. He hoped everything would go smoothly. His father had handled every detail of the booking himself, even tucking a handwritten note into Micah's backpack that said, "Be brave. Enjoy the skies. I'm proud of you." When boarding began, Nora took Micah's small bag while he approached the gate agent with their tickets. The woman at the counter smiled warmly, scanned their passes, and gestured them through. They walked down the jet bridge and stepped into the softly lit elegance of the first-class cabin. Wide leather seats, low ambient music, plush carpeting, it felt like another world. Micah took his seat by the window while Nora carefully tucked their luggage into the overhead compartment. Micah buckled up, pulled out his headphones, and got ready to relax and watch a movie. But peace didn't last long. A flight attendant appeared. Her name tag read Dana. Her jaw was sharp, her lipstick crimson, her expression pinched and stiff. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a welcome. She walked right to their row and stopped. Her gaze moved over Micah, then to Nora, suspicious. "Is this your seat?" she asked curtly. Nora nodded, calm as always. "Yes, ma'am. Seats 3A and 3B. Dana barely glanced at the ticket. Her arms folded across her chest. "This section is for first-class passengers only," she said, her tone cold. Nora blinked, confused. "Yes, we are aware. These are our assigned seats." Micah said nothing, but tension crackled in the air. Other passengers had started to glance over, their ears subtly tuned in. Dana didn't ease up. "You'll need to head back to your actual seats. If there was an error in printing, we'll address it later. But you can't sit here." Nora furrowed her brow. "There's no error. His father booked these seats personally. Everything's been confirmed." She pulled out her phone, ready to show the email receipt. Dana waved her off with irritation. "That won't be necessary. Just take your things and move. I don't have time for this." Her voice was louder now, sharp, dismissive, full of judgment. Micah looked up, his cheeks starting to warm. "But this is my seat," he said softly. "I didn't do anything wrong." Dana's eyes narrowed. "Are you talking back to me?" And without warning, slap. Her hand struck him across the face, a sharp sound slicing through the cabin. For a moment, the world stopped. A businessman in the next row froze with his coffee midair. A woman clutched her chest in disbelief. Nora stood frozen, her phone still in hand. Micah sat perfectly still, stunned, his cheek flushed red. His eyes blinked slowly, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared at Dana, silent. She loomed over him, her voice tight and scolding. "Don't raise your voice again. Not on my flight." Then she turned and walked away, as if nothing had happened. Micah slowly pulled out his phone and typed a short message. "She hit me. First class." Then he pressed send. Nora finally moved. Her hand trembled as she pulled a tissue from her bag and gently touched Micah's cheek. "Are you all right, sweetheart?" she whispered. Micah gave a tiny nod, still too stunned to speak. His thumb hovered over his phone. Nora stood, her voice no longer soft but steady. "I need to speak to the captain. Right now," a few passengers whispered. A man leaned toward his wife. "Did she just slap that boy?" She nodded, eyes still wide, staring at Micah. No one stood. No one said a word. Then Micah's phone buzzed with a reply. He looked down. Micah stared down at the glowing screen in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly as a message popped up from his father. "What do you mean, she hit you? Where are you?" Micah quickly typed back, his heart pounding harder now. "Still in seat 3A. She said I didn't belong." Beside him, Nora was trying to stay composed, her voice low but urgent. She struck him, in front of everyone. She still couldn't believe it. Another message buzzed in just moments later. "Stay put. Don't move. I'm on this flight." Micah blinked. He read the message again. His father was here? On this flight? He looked up, scanning the first-class cabin. Nora sat back beside him, her jaw tight. "I'm reporting her the moment we land," she said under her breath. "She's not walking away from this." But Micah hardly heard her. His eyes were locked on the aisle. And then he saw him. A man stood near the rear of first class. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. He moved with the quiet gravity of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Micah's father, Jonathan Hale, was already walking toward them. Heads turned. Conversations died. The air inside the cabin shifted. Nora gasped. Micah sat up straighter. Further down the aisle, Dana, who had just been handing a drink to another passenger, turned and froze. Her practiced smile vanished instantly. Jonathan stopped directly in front of her, his expression unreadable, but his voice carried steel. "You slapped my son." Dana opened her mouth. No words came out. I didn't realize." Jonathan cut in, sharp but quiet. "You didn't realize he was my son? Or you didn't realize what it meant to lay hands on a child in front of a cabin full of people?" The tension was thick. Phones were out. Passengers leaned forward, holding their breath. Dana's cheeks flushed. "I thought he wasn't supposed to be in that seat. I assumed he was trying to sneak in." Jonathan took one calm step closer. "You assumed. That's the problem." His voice never rose, but the weight in it pressed against the cabin walls. "Did you check his ticket?" I looked, but it didn't seem right." "Did you call anyone to verify it?" "No. I didn't think I had to. And instead of checking, you chose to hit him, in full view of your passengers." Jonathan's tone remained level. But Dana flinched like she'd been shouted at. "You saw a boy who didn't look like he belonged, and you made a decision. That decision will now cost you everything." Dana glanced around. Whispers had started. Phones were recording. Her confidence crumbled. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Jonathan didn't respond. He turned to one of the junior attendants nearby and said clearly, "Get the captain on the line. Tell him Jonathan Hale needs to speak with him immediately." The attendant rushed toward the front without hesitation. Dana remained frozen. The authority that once filled her steps had vanished. Her hands, now tightly clasped, trembled. Micah watched it all unfold, still silent, still processing. His father didn't even look at Dana again. He stood tall beside his son, eyes fixed forward. Within moments, the attendant returned and handed him a phone from the crew's intercom system, and Jonathan pressed it to his ear. "Captain, this is Jonathan Hale. I trust you've been briefed." A pause, then a quiet acknowledgement from the other end. "Good. Remove her from all passenger-facing duties immediately. She is not to speak to anyone until we land. I want security waiting at the gate." Dana's face went pale. She looked around as if still hoping someone would step in for her. But no one did. Even the passengers who had remained quiet during the chaos now stared, wide-eyed, watching, some recording. Jonathan handed the phone back, then turned to Dana. His voice was calm, final. "Go to the back. Do not speak to another passenger. You are finished for this flight." Dana opened her mouth again, but her voice failed her. She turned, pushing the drink cart with stiff hands, each step slower than the last. No applause followed, no loud confrontation, just silence. And that silence weighed more than any punishment. Nora let out a shaky breath finally. She turned to Micah. "Are you okay?" He nodded faintly, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know he was here." She gave him a small smile. "He doesn't like to announce himself. That's how he keeps people honest." Jonathan quietly sat beside his son, his presence still and unwavering. Micah looked over at him. This was far from over. Jonathan turned slightly toward his son, the sternness in his posture softening. "You handled that better than most grown men would have," he said quietly. Micah looked up at him, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't know what to do." Jonathan shook his head. "You didn't have to do anything. You did what I've always told you. Stay calm, tell the truth, and let the right people deal with the wrong ones." A man across the aisle, wearing a gray pullover, leaned forward. "Sir," he said, guilt clear in his voice, "I saw what happened. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner." Jonathan gave him a brief glance, then a single pointed nod. "Thank you. But you should have said it earlier." The man looked down, ashamed. At the back of the plane, Dana now sat alone in the last row, her hands clenched in her lap, her gaze fixed downward. She looked nothing like the woman who had strutted through the cabin earlier. The confidence had drained from her face. Behind her, 2 other flight attendants exchanged quiet words, clearly aware of the situation that had unfolded up front. Jonathan adjusted his seat, his expression unreadable. Nora leaned over gently and handed Micah a bottle of water. The cabin was hushed now. No one was chatting or laughing. The air had shifted. Whatever authority once rested in the pressed uniform of a crew member now sat beside a quiet boy with a bruised cheek and a composed heart. Micah slowly reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded note. It was the letter his father had given him before the flight. He unfolded it again, eyes drawn to the last line. "You are stronger than they think. Never forget who you are." The plane sailed quietly above the clouds, but the tension hadn't left. From time to time, passengers stole glances toward the front. Their eyes moved from Micah to Jonathan, then quickly turned away, as if ashamed to be caught looking. Nora had tucked a soft blanket over Micah's legs and occasionally leaned in to whisper comfort. Jonathan sat beside them, composed as ever, his presence steady and sure. Meanwhile, in the rear galley, Dana sat frozen, arms crossed tight over her chest. She breathed shallowly, her mind running wild. She'd worked hundreds of flights. She'd turned away passengers before, ones who didn't look right, who made her uneasy. And she had never been questioned, not once, until now. She hadn't asked Micah's name, hadn't verified anything. She had just looked at his hoodie, his face, his skin, and decided. And now that decision had reached the cockpit and beyond. Beside her, a younger flight attendant leaned against the counter, watching her silently. Her name tag read Ela. She had seen everything. Though she hadn't spoken up when it happened, something inside her now twisted with guilt. After a long silence, Isla finally said, "You didn't even check his name, did you?" Dana didn't answer. Isla looked away, her voice quieter but firm. "You didn't stop the man in 3C? He walked in wearing sandals and a hoodie, and you didn't say a word. But him, you questioned immediately." Dana's voice cracked slightly, defensive and unsure. "I thought he was lying." "No," Isla said slowly. "You thought he didn't belong. That's the problem." Dana looked down, her throat tight. In the cockpit, the captain finished a calm exchange with ground control. He turned to the co-pilot, his voice quiet but resolute. "Security's been notified. Mr. Hale made it clear. She's not walking off this plane like it didn't happen." The co-pilot nodded. "They're sending 2 officers to meet us at the gate." Back in his seat, Micah leaned his head against the window, still quiet. Jonathan turned toward him. "What's on your mind?" Micah shrugged slightly. "I was just wondering, would she have hit me if I looked different?" Jonathan was silent for a moment. Then he said gently, "Maybe not. But what matters is, she won't do it again." Micah turned to him. "How do you know?" Jonathan didn't answer with words. Instead, he reached for the cabin phone once again. "This is Jonathan Hale," he said into the receiver. "I want full footage from this flight pulled. Cabin security video, passenger testimonies, crew communications, everything, before we land." A voice on the other end confirmed the request. Jonathan hung up and looked at his son. "Because we're not just holding her accountable. We're going to make sure the whole system learns." Micah gave a faint nod. He still didn't feel powerful, but something was different now. What once felt like silence born from fear now felt like silence rooted in respect. At the back of the plane, Dana sat frozen. Minutes passed, but for her time had slowed into something unbearable. She had stopped pretending. Her hands lay stiffly in her lap, her mouth dry. She heard a whisper, one of the other attendants speaking softly into a cabin phone. She didn't need to ask what it was about. She already knew. Dana didn't need to hear what was being said over the phone to know it was about her. She could feel it in the way passengers now looked at her, not with polite indifference, but with silent judgment. They weren't just glancing anymore. They were remembering. And the worst part was, they had all seen what she did before they knew who the boy was. There was no hiding now. At the front of the cabin, Jonathan Hale sat motionless. But inside, his mind was alive. People saw his sharp suits, the headlines, the press photos with polished smiles. But they didn't see the 2 a.m. meetings, the dismissed ideas, the doors he had to break down just to be taken seriously in an industry that didn't expect someone like him to lead. This moment wasn't just personal, it was systemic. It was about every boy like Micah, who might not have a father in seat 4D ready to rise for him. Jonathan glanced sideways. Micah sat still, not asleep, but quiet, his cheeks still faintly marked from the slap, his expression unreadable. Nora gently reached into her handbag and pulled out a small envelope. "You told me to hold this, just in case," she said softly. "I think now might be the time." Jonathan took it, opened the flap, and pulled out 2 cards inside a folded document. One was Micah's first-class member pass, marked with a signature known only to upper management. The other, a Platinum Family Identification Badge, clearly issued by the airline's internal executive office. Micah had been officially cleared, verified, recognized. And Dana had still decided he didn't belong. Jonathan tucked the envelope into his inner jacket pocket and exhaled slowly. He turned his head, eyes sweeping across the quiet, alert cabin. Then wordlessly, he rose. Every pair of eyes followed him. He walked calmly toward the galley, where a few remaining flight attendants were tidying up trays and cups. He didn't raise his voice. "I'd like to speak with the crew. All of you, in private." There was no hesitation. One by one, the flight attendants followed him into the narrow galley at the back. Only Dana remained seated, until another crew member approached her and lightly tapped her shoulder. She stood slowly, her limbs stiff, and followed behind them. She didn't want to, but refusing would only make it worse. Inside the galley, Jonathan stood tall among the staff. His tone was composed, but carried authority. "You've all been trained," he began, "to treat passengers with dignity, not just the ones you think are important, not just the ones who look like they belong in a magazine." He looked directly at Dana, though his voice didn't change. "Today, that training failed, and many of you stood by and let it happen." A few of the crew shifted uncomfortably. Dana kept her head down. "I'm not here to intimidate you," Jonathan continued, "but understand this. When you wear this uniform, my uniform, you answer for how you treat every soul on that plane." He paused. "That boy you dismissed? He's my son. But even if he weren't, he deserved better than what happened here today." Silence followed. "You'll each file a full report by the end of the day," he added, "because when we land, this doesn't stay in the air." He looked Dana in the eyes once, just once, then turned and walked away. Dana didn't follow. She couldn't. Not anymore. She stood still in the galley, her hands trembling slightly. The strength she thought she had was gone. Back at his seat, Jonathan sat down beside Micah once again. Micah had shifted, no longer sunken or unsure. There was something steadier in his posture now, a quiet resolve. Jonathan noticed. He gave a small nod as if to say, "I saw it too." Nora leaned in and whispered, "They don't know who they were dealing with?" Jonathan gave the faintest smile. "They're not supposed to. That's the point. But now they will." Behind them, a man in a business suit cleared his throat awkwardly. "Sir," he said, "I saw it all. I should have spoken up earlier. I didn't. I'm sorry." Jonathan didn't turn his head. His voice was cool but clear. "And if you hadn't known who we were, would you still feel sorry?" The man had no reply, just silence. Back in the galley, Dana leaned against the wall, her breath shallow, her fingers ice cold. The weight of her own crew's stares burned into her. Isla, the young attendant, hesitated for a moment before speaking. She started, then stopped. The air was thick, heavy, charged. Finally Dana spoke, her voice raw and cracked. "I made a mistake. I know that." Isla stared at her, eyes unreadable. "It wasn't just a mistake. You didn't even stop to ask. You saw him, and you decided." Dana didn't respond. She couldn't. "You didn't ask. You didn't confirm. You didn't care," Isla added softly. Dana whispered, "I thought he was trying to sneak in." "No," Isla said, her voice quiet but firm. "You thought he didn't belong." And that silence, between those two sentences, cut deeper than any shout ever could. Dana sank into the nearest jump seat, eyes on her shoes. The pressure in her chest swelled. But she didn't cry. Not here, not yet. She had spent years believing she knew how to keep things in order, believing rules justified her instincts, believing judgment kept everything clean. But this wasn't about order anymore. This was about pride, about assumption, and now she was the one being judged. In the cockpit, the captain read another update on his screen. A message from ground control confirmed. Security was standing by at Gate 7, per Mr. Hale's directive. He turned to his co-pilot and gave a subtle nod. "They've approved everything. Escort's ready." The co-pilot glanced toward the cabin door. "Think she knows?" The captain sighed. She's about to. Meanwhile, back in first class, Micah reached into his backpack again and pulled out his father's letter. The edges of the paper had curled from how often he had unfolded it. He read it silently, his eyes locked on the words he'd read so many times before. You don't need to shout to be heard. Strength doesn't always speak loud. Sometimes it just sits still and waits. He folded it slowly and tucked it away. Across the aisle, a woman leaned forward, her voice quiet and kind. "You were very brave," she said. Micah looked over, surprised. "Thank you." She smiled, warmly, but sadly. Most people would have screamed. "You didn't. That's real power." Nora, sitting beside him, gave the woman a small nod, thankful someone had finally said it out loud. But Micah didn't smile. He didn't feel brave. He hadn't wanted to be a symbol of anything that day. He just wanted to board a plane, watch a movie, land safely, and go home. But someone had looked at him and decided he didn't belong in seat 3A. And now, everything had changed. At the back of the plane, Dana sat rigidly on a jump seat, her flight-issued notepad trembling slightly in her hands. She flipped to a blank page and slowly began to write. "Today, I let pride speak louder than reason." She stared at the words for a long time, unsure who they were for, herself or the boy she'd struck. But for the first time since it happened, she wasn't crafting an excuse. She was writing truth. The engines hummed overhead, steady and calm. But inside the cabin, the air was thick, tight, with everything unspoken. No one joked. No one laughed. Even the flight attendants, moving quietly through the aisles, spoke only when necessary. Their hands were steady but stiff. This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It was about what that incident had revealed. Micah leaned his head back, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. Across from him, Jonathan watched, noticing everything: his son's silence, his posture, the slight way he held himself. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was that heavy, unshakable feeling of being misjudged, of being seen in the wrong way. Jonathan gently placed a hand on Micah's shoulder. "Tell me what you're feeling." Micah didn't answer right away. Then he turned to his father. "She didn't even ask my name," he said. "She just looked at me and decided." Jonathan's jaw tightened. He nodded slowly. "You're right." Micah looked away again. "I wasn't even loud. I was just sitting there. And she didn't say a word to the man across from us. And he looked like he rolled out of a laundromat." That pulled a quiet breath from Nora, who tried not to laugh, though her face remained serious. She gently reached over and held Micah's hand. "She picked me," he said quietly. "Out of everyone. She picked me." Jonathan let the silence hang there. Then he leaned closer. "And now, everyone's watching her, because you didn't scream. You didn't fight. You didn't give her what she expected. You gave her truth. And now, she has to live with it." Micah lowered his gaze, unsure how to respond. His father's words were comforting, but they didn't erase what had happened. They didn't take away the sting of her hand, or the sting of that moment when her eyes told him, "You don't belong here." Back in the galley, Dana stared at the sentence she had written. She couldn't look away from it. For the first time in her long career, she had no defense, no version of the story she could tell herself to make it right. Her pen hovered again, then moved slowly across the page. He was polite. He was calm. And I still chose to humiliate him. She read it over and over, until her vision blurred. The walls felt smaller, the galley tighter. Then, footsteps. She turned and saw Isla standing nearby, arms crossed, but her expression softer than before. "You know what's going to happen when we land, right?" Isla asked gently. Dana didn't respond. "They've already alerted security," Isla added. They'll be at the gate. Dana swallowed. Her voice cracked. Do you think I deserve it? Isla hesitated, then said quietly, It's not about what I think. It's about what you did. Dana blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. I didn't know who he was. Isla shook her head. That's not the issue. It's that you didn't know what he was. You didn't think he was worthy of first class. And that's what people are going to remember. Up front, the captain's voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent in approximately 20 minutes. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. A rustle moved through the cabin. Passengers adjusted trays, pulled blankets, shifted in their seats. Some tried to appear casual. But they weren't watching the descent. They were watching what would happen next. Jonathan Hale leaned toward Nora, his voice low and steady. When we land, take Micah straight to the car. The private one. There'll be press. I don't want him facing cameras or questions. Nora nodded without hesitation. What about you? I'm staying. Micah turned to him, surprised. Why? Jonathan looked his son in the eye. His voice never wavered. Because lessons don't last without consequences. I'm not leaving this plane until everyone who needs to answer for today does. Micah didn't respond, but the corner of his mouth twitched, a mix of gratitude and quiet relief. He didn't know exactly what his father intended to do after they landed, but he knew this much. Dana, the woman who slapped him, wasn't going to walk out of the terminal with the same pride she walked in with. Not anymore. At the back of the cabin, Dana wasn't rehearsing excuses. She wasn't planning a defense. For the first time in her career, she was simply thinking about what it meant to look at a stranger and decide who they were, without asking, without caring. And that thought stung more than anything else. The descent had begun, but for many on board, it felt like they had already landed, somewhere deep, uncomfortable, and long overdue. The plane was still in the sky, but the truth had already arrived. Passengers who had pretended to read magazines now sat rigidly, glancing forward with quiet guilt. Their eyes flicked to Micah, then to Jonathan, then quickly away. Nora leaned over, brushing Micah's curls back from his forehead. Your father's right, she whispered. You didn't deserve what happened, but you didn't shrink either. You stood tall. Micah said nothing. His gaze stayed forward, hands folded neatly in his lap. He wasn't angry. He wasn't crying. But something inside him had changed. Hardened. Quietly. It had taken just one slap to change how he would see the world, and how the world would see him, forever. Across the aisle, a woman in a navy blazer leaned closer. Her voice was soft, but unwavering. I saw everything, she said. And I should have said something. I'm sorry. Micah turned slightly toward her, his expression steady. You weren't the only one, he replied. Her eyes dropped to her lap. Jonathan said nothing. He didn't need to. He was never the kind of man who shouted in public. But when he went quiet, that was when he became the most dangerous. Each moment of silence now was shaping exactly what would happen the second that plane touched down. Outside the window, rooftops came into view. Runways stretched like ribbons below. The city's lights blinked beneath the clouds. Inside his pocket, Jonathan's phone buzzed once. An alert from his assistant. The security team was in place, discreet, waiting outside the jet bridge. 2 senior executives from the company's internal office would be at the gate as well. One of them had already been given Dana's name. Legal had reviewed the footage. The wheels were in motion. In the galley, Dana wiped her face with the edge of her sleeve. Her cheeks were blotchy now. Her composure had cracked. Her name badge still clung to her uniform, but it felt weightless now. Useless. She heard the landing gear drop below. The lights in the cabin dimmed. The captain's voice returned one last time. "Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Dana rose on unsteady feet and approached the intercom. Her fingers hovered over the button. But she didn't press it. She didn't need to say anything anymore. Everyone already knew. She turned and quietly sat back down, facing the rear bulkhead, like a student outside the principal's office. Isla stood nearby, arms crossed. She wasn't gloating. She wasn't angry. But she also wasn't smiling. "You still have a chance to say something before this is over," she said gently. "Not for them. For yourself." Dana didn't reply. Back up front, Jonathan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his phone. He opened the Notes app and typed a single sentence. "Press. No statements today. Let the footage speak." Then he hit send. Nora leaned closer to Micah. "When the doors open, there may be flashing lights. Just keep walking. Don't stop. Don't speak." "I don't want to be famous," Micah muttered under his breath. "You're not," Jonathan said, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "You're visible. That's different." He paused, his eyes focused ahead. "And now, they're going to have to look at what they ignored." The wheels touched down with a gentle bounce, the plane gliding smoothly across the tarmac. The cabin jolted slightly as the brakes engaged, but no one moved, despite the instinct to grab bags and stretch limbs. The seatbelt sign still glowed overhead, but Jonathan Hale remained still. So did Nora, and so did Micah, who now sat with his eyes locked on the front exit, like it was the finish line of something much bigger than a flight. Across the aisle, the woman in the navy blazer stood again. This time, her voice didn't hide behind politeness. "You all saw it," she said, louder now. "We all did." Heads turned toward her. A boy was slapped, and not one of us stood up. There was a pause, and then the man in the business suit nodded solemnly. "That's not something I'll forget," he said. Another voice near the back murmured, "It's on video!" Everyone saw it. Micah didn't respond, but when he looked around this time, he saw something had changed. Not just guilt. There was shame, yes, but also something else. Respect. The aircraft came to a stop. Outside Micah's window, he saw them, 3 security officers in uniform standing near the edge of the jet bridge. One held a clipboard, another scanned a printed crew manifest. Dana hadn't seen them yet, but she would. The soft click of the cabin door unlocking, followed by the mechanical hum of the jet bridge sliding into place, marked the official end of the flight, but not the end of the story. The usual flurry of passengers jumping up for overhead bins never came. No chatter, no laughter, only stillness. People sat frozen, eyes fixed ahead, waiting for the inevitable. Jonathan sat calm, composed. His phone was tucked away. His legs crossed, one hand resting on the armrest like he had all the time in the world. Nora leaned into Micah. "Don't look back. Just focus forward when it's time." Micah nodded slightly. His hands were clenched together in his lap, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from something heavier. He wasn't worried about getting off the plane. He was wondering what would happen to Dana, and whether she'd even understand why. At the back, Dana slowly stood. Her hands moved to smooth the wrinkles in her skirt. Her expression was blank. The other crew members didn't speak to her. They avoided her eyes completely. The intercom buzzed in the galley. A junior attendant answered it quietly, then turned to Dana. "They're asking for you," she said. Dana froze. "Now." She swallowed. Her throat was dry, her hands clammy. She stepped into the aisle and walked slowly toward the front. The same aisle she had once moved through with practiced authority. Now it felt foreign. Every seat, every glance, a weight pressing on her shoulders. No one spoke, but everyone watched. Micah didn't turn his head, but he felt her pass. He caught the scent of her floral perfume, and with it came the sting of that moment, all over again. Still, he stayed still. At the front, Dana stood beside the open cabin door. Outside, 2 uniformed officers and a man in a dark blazer waited. Clipboard in hand, expression formal but not unkind. He stepped forward, voice calm and precise. "Ms. Devlin, you are being escorted from this flight per direct instruction from executive oversight. You are to remain present for a formal review and incident documentation. Please comply." Dana's voice cracked. "Yes, sir." A murmur stirred in the cabin. One of the officers stepped inside. "Miss, come with us, please." Dana glanced once, briefly, at Jonathan, then quickly looked away. She stepped forward. She walked alone. No one followed. No one comforted. Not even her own crew. From row 2, an older man stood and looked toward Jonathan. "I just wanted to say, sir, I've flown with this airline for years. I've never seen anything like this before." Jonathan looked up. "That's the problem." The man nodded slowly, then sat back down. A line began to form, but no one rushed to be first. There was a curtain of respect now, unspoken but clear. Passengers gave Jonathan and Micah space, as if instinctively understanding they weren't just leaving a plane. They were leaving a moment the world wouldn't forget. The woman in the navy blazer stepped closer to them in the aisle as the line moved. "I hope your son knows he didn't do anything wrong. What happened, it was seen, really seen." Nora offered her a gentle smile. "He knows." Jonathan rose, adjusted his jacket, and extended his hand toward Micah. Micah stood with quiet composure, stronger now. As they stepped into the aisle, a few passengers gave them nods, not of pity, but of acknowledgement. They weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses. And now, part of the change. At the cabin door, Jonathan paused. He turned, not to the passengers, but to seat 3A, Micah's seat. He stared at it for a moment, then turned back. Together, they stepped onto the jet bridge, and outside, the flashes began. Photographers, reporters, hands holding up mics. The storm had arrived. Microphones hovered high. Voices called out questions. But Jonathan Hale didn't stop walking. His long strides were deliberate, focused. Nora stayed just behind, gently shielding Micah from the flurry of attention as the security officer at the front cleared a path toward a waiting black cart just beyond the terminal doors. As they neared the vehicle, Micah looked up at his father. "Are they all here because of what happened?" Jonathan nodded. "They'd be here either way. We just made sure the story they tell is the right one." The car door opened. As they climbed in, Micah glanced back through the tinted window. Standing near a service entrance flanked by 2 airport officials was Dana Devlin. Her posture was stiff, her head down. Even from a distance, Micah could see it. She looked smaller now. Not because of the press, not because of the suspension, but because the truth had finally caught up to her. The black sedan pulled away from the terminal, cameras still flashing in the rear view. Inside the vehicle, the silence felt different now. It wasn't heavy, like earlier. It wasn't filled with tension or confusion. It was quiet with understanding. Micah stared out at the runway lights, still gripping his backpack like it was the only thing anchoring him to calm. Nora sat close, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Jonathan pulled out his phone. Messages flooded in. Executives, legal, board members, apologies, updates, statements of support. He skimmed them in silence, then locked the screen and slipped the phone back into his jacket. "No calls," he said quietly. "Not until we're home." Micah finally spoke. "What's going to happen to her?" Jonathan looked over, calm but clear. "That depends on her. But she's not walking away like nothing happened. And she's never going to decide who belongs in first class again." Micah nodded slowly. She was so sure of herself. Like she's done it before. She probably has, Nora said, her voice low. Maybe not with her hands, but with her eyes, her tone, her assumptions. Jonathan looked out the windshield, voice steady. That's the kind of power people use quietly. It's not in rules or uniforms. It's in the belief that no one will challenge them. But today, he looked back at Micah. She picked the wrong son and the wrong father. Back at the airport, Dana sat alone in a cold, windowless room just outside the staff operations wing. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above. A small clock ticked on the wall, each second louder than the last. Her uniform blazer was folded neatly on the chair beside her. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles pale. Her chest rose and fell with each uneasy breath. Not because she was afraid of losing her job, but because, for the first time, she realized how badly she had failed. Across the table, the airline's regional HR manager scanned through a printed stack of incident documentation. The video footage had been reviewed, passenger statements collected. There was nothing left to guess. Dana Devlin had slapped a teenage boy, denied him a seat his ticket clearly assigned, and did it all based on how he looked, how he dressed, and what she assumed he couldn't possibly be. The manager set the papers down. "Ms. Devlin," she began, voice even, "before we proceed, is there anything you'd like to say?" Dana opened her mouth. No words came out. The manager waited. After a long pause, Dana finally spoke. Her voice cracked. "I didn't think he belonged. I thought he was lying." The manager looked directly at her. "And now?" Dana blinked back, the tears pushing at the edge of her eyes. "Now I know it wasn't just a mistake. I treated him like a problem before I even spoke a word to him." The manager nodded and made a note in the file. "The Hale family has chosen not to press criminal charges," she said calmly. "But Mr. Hale has requested a full formal review by the board. You are suspended pending the outcome." Dana nodded. She wasn't surprised, but she was ashamed. The manager slid a printed email across the table. "Mr. Hale asked us to share this with you." Dana hesitated before taking the paper. The message was brief. It was sent directly from Jonathan's phone, just hours after the incident. "She doesn't owe me an apology. She owes my son her respect. He didn't get it. Now he will." Dana lowered the note slowly. Her eyes stung. Not from the consequences, but from the clarity. She hadn't just broken a rule. She'd broken something within herself. And for the first time, she truly saw it. Across the city, the black sedan rolled through the gates of Jonathan Hale's estate. Tall iron fences framing a quiet, tree-lined driveway, far removed from the chaos of the terminal they had just left. Inside the house, a housekeeper took their coats, and Nora gently guided Micah toward the stairs. But halfway up, Micah stopped and turned back to his father. "Dad," Jonathan looked up. "I want to go to school like normal tomorrow," Micah said. "No driver, no press, no one walking me in. Just normal." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Micah nodded. "Yeah. I don't want people to treat me special because something bad happened. I want them to know I belong, without having to prove it." Jonathan took a slow breath, then crossed the room and placed a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone, but if you want normal, we'll give you normal." Micah smiled, for the first time that day. Just a little. Nora gave him a quick hug and nudged him gently up the stairs. As Micah disappeared into his room, Jonathan turned and finally let himself sit. He sank into the armchair in the living room, head tilted back, eyes tracing the ceiling. It had been a long flight. But it wasn't the turbulence in the air that made it hard. It was the kind of storm that brews when people forget that power isn't found in uniforms or seat numbers. It's in how you treat the quiet kid sitting in seat 3A. And now, that kid would never be invisible again. The next morning arrived under a pale, early sky. The house was already stirring. In the kitchen, Nora stood quietly packing Micah's lunch. The TV murmured in the background, news anchors speaking in soft, overly careful tones. The headline scrolled across the screen. Flight attendant under fire. After first-class incident involving CEO's son. Jonathan stood by the window, coffee in hand, watching his son tie his sneakers near the staircase. Micah looked like any other 16-year-old, hoodie zipped, backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones resting around his neck. But Jonathan knew nothing about this morning was truly ordinary. "Your driver's waiting," he said gently. Micah didn't turn around. "I told you, I want to take the bus." Jonathan didn't argue. He simply nodded once. "The driver will follow. From a distance, just in case." Micah sighed but didn't push back. He stood, grabbed his bag, and turned to face his father. "If someone asked me about it today, what do I say?" Jonathan met his eyes. "You don't owe anyone your story. But if you decide to share it, tell the truth. Nothing more." Micah nodded, then stepped toward the door. Before he opened it, Nora stopped him and slipped a small folded note into the pocket of his hoodie. "Don't open it unless you really need it," she said with a wink. Micah smiled and walked out, the door clicking softly behind him. As the bus pulled up to the curb down the street, Jonathan's phone buzzed, a call from the boardroom. He didn't answer. Instead, he opened his laptop and began reading through the overnight reports. His inbox was flooded, half from department heads offering support, the other half from PR teams preparing statements. But Jonathan wasn't ready to release anything. Not yet. He believed in statements, but only after accountability. Words were meaningless without action. Across town, Dana Devlin sat alone at her small kitchen table, the one she rarely used. The blinds were closed, the air stale. Her uniform hung limply over a chair. Her name badge, a source of pride just days ago, now looked like a weight she could no longer carry. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. She didn't open it. Instead, she opened the draft folder on her laptop. There, waiting with a blinking cursor, was the apology she'd written the night before, but hadn't sent. Subject: "To the boy, I failed." She read through it again. She had rewritten it a dozen times, but it always ended with the same line. "I didn't see you." And that was the problem. Her hand hovered over the mouse. What if it was too late? What if it didn't matter anymore? What if he didn't want to hear from her at all? Just as she started to close the laptop, a notification popped up. A new message. From Isla. "They're launching bias training. Mandatory. Starts next week. Thought you'd want to know." Dana stared at the message. She didn't reply. But something inside her exhaled for the first time in days. Something had shifted. Not erased, but shifted. Maybe she hadn't been cast out completely. Maybe she had finally been forced to look in the mirror. 15 floors above the city, inside a sleek glass conference room, 3 senior executives sat across from Jonathan on a video call. One, a tall woman in glasses, read aloud from a document. "We've reviewed the cabin footage, gathered all witness statements, and confirmed that the actions of the flight attendant violated protocol on multiple levels." Jonathan's face remained unreadable. "She's been suspended indefinitely, pending final review," the woman continued. "The union is asking for a chance at reinstatement, but that decision is ultimately yours." The decision was now his. Jonathan Hale leaned forward, his arms resting firmly on the sleek boardroom table. "This isn't about her anymore," he said. "It's about the culture that allowed her to think it was normal." The room fell silent. "We're not just punishing a person. We're rebuilding a standard." One person's mistake doesn't excuse the silence around her. No one interrupted, He continued, his voice calm but commanding. From now on, every single first-class crew member is to be trained personally. Not just on procedures, but on perception. I want quarterly reviews, anonymous passenger feedback, and a new system to report bias. One that doesn't get filtered through layers of silence. He looked around the room. This isn't PR. It's permanent. One executive shifted in his chair. That'll require a complete restructuring, staffing, budgeting. Jonathan didn't blink. Then restructure it. Back at school, Micah stepped off the bus and made his way to the entrance. His hoodie was pulled up, headphones slung around his neck. He didn't want attention, but it followed him anyway. Heads turned. Whispers floated. Eyes lingered longer than usual. Near his locker, a student stepped in front of him. "Hey, I saw what happened online." "That was crazy." Micah paused. "Yeah, I mean, you didn't even do anything." The boy shook his head. "Just wanted to say, you didn't deserve that." Micah didn't know what to say. So he nodded. "Thanks." He opened his locker and reached inside, his hand brushing against something folded in his hoodie pocket. He pulled it out. It was Nora's note. He looked around, then opened it. "You're not here to be liked. You're here because you earned it. Keep your head up." N. Micah folded it again and tucked it back into his pocket. And for the first time since the flight, he smiled to himself. Because he realized something. He wasn't just the boy who got slapped. He was the one who made sure it would never happen again. The day dragged on. The hours at school moved slowly, like they were padded with silence. Students whispered, but never too loudly. Everywhere Micah walked, eyes followed, but not with judgment. With something else. Curiosity, awareness, maybe even admiration. At lunch, he sat in his usual spot, far corner of the cafeteria. His friends Ben, Claire, and Theo joined him, but the usual jokes were gone. They picked at their food, stealing glances at him. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "It's all over the news, you know." Micah nodded. "I figured." "They're showing the part where she hit you," Ben added. "And the part where your dad stepped up like some boss." Theo leaned in. "Is it true she got fired?" Micah was quiet for a moment. Then, "She got taken off the flight. She's suspended. The rest, still being decided." His voice was even, calmer than before, but there was something else in it now. A quiet strength. A weight he hadn't chosen, but now carried. Claire asked softly, "You okay?" Micah nodded, but he didn't look up. "I will be." Back at headquarters, Jonathan stood inside a glass-walled room overlooking the skyline. His arms folded, his posture rigid. Around him, the airline's senior leadership sat silently while the legal team finished their update. "Our public response has been contained," one executive said. "We've directed press to our official statement. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly supportive." Jonathan didn't react. "I'm not concerned with public reaction," he said, voice sharp. "I'm concerned that it happened at all. That under our name, on our watch, not one employee, not one witness, stood up before it became a headline." Another pause. Everyone shifted uncomfortably. "We won't fix this with statements. We fix it with structure." The HR director cleared her throat. "We've drafted a policy overhaul. It includes extended crew training, behavior audits, mentorship programs, and a new reporting line that sends complaints of discrimination directly to the executive board." Jonathan gave a single nod. "Approve it," he said, then added, "and name it after him." Everyone looked at him. "Name it after my son," he said again, calm but resolute. "Let every crew member see his name every time they open a training manual. Let them remember what it cost." No one argued. Elsewhere in the city, Dana Devlin sat in silence. She was still in the same plain gray sweater from the day before, her hair loosely tied back, the curtains drawn. The TV was off. Her phone face down. The only sound in her apartment came from the clock ticking on the wall. She reached for her laptop, opened it. The apology email still sat in her drafts folder. She hadn't changed the words. She hadn't deleted them either. But today, her fingers hovered differently over the keys. The apology email still sat open on her screen. Dana Devlin hadn't added to it. She hadn't deleted it either. She just stared at it, unsure whether she had the right to say anything at all. But eventually her fingers moved. She clicked send. She didn't send it to Jonathan Hale. She didn't send it to Nora. She sent it to Micah. Subject: from the woman who judged you. You don't know me, and I didn't know you. But I made a choice about who you were without asking. I took your peace and turned it into pain. I can't take that moment back, but I can promise it was the last time I act from a place of pride. I'm sorry. She hit send and sat back. She didn't know if it would be read. She didn't expect forgiveness. But for the first time in weeks, something inside her shifted. It wasn't relief. It wasn't closure. It was movement. Finally, she didn't feel stuck anymore. That evening, as golden sunlight spilled through the window of Micah's room, he sat at his desk finishing a math assignment. His phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. A name appeared that twisted something in his stomach. Dana Devlin. He hesitated, then opened the message. He read every word, once, then again. Then he placed the phone face down on his desk and stared out the window. He didn't respond. He didn't delete it either. Some things didn't need replies. Some things just needed to be heard. And miles away in a small apartment, Dana finally heard herself. For the first time in a long time. It wasn't enough, but it was a beginning. 2 weeks passed. The news cycle moved on. The headlines faded. But the story didn't disappear. It had become something else now. Not a trending topic. Not a PR crisis. It became part of the bones of the company. Inside training rooms. Inside policy manuals. Inside whispered conversations among flight crews preparing for takeoff. On the cover of every new internal document at Hale Air, bold print now read, "The Micah Hale Policy Reform." Jonathan hadn't added the name for branding. He added it for accountability. He wanted every crew member to see that name, to remember what silence had allowed, and what it would no longer protect. This wasn't performative. It was practical. The training was redesigned from the ground up. No PowerPoint slides, no memorized definitions. Jonathan Hale personally approved the curriculum. It included real case studies, real scenarios, including Micah's. The sessions were raw, uncomfortable, honest. He watched the first one from behind a tinted observation window. The facilitator read the scenario aloud. A teenage passenger with a valid first-class ticket. Accused. Humiliated. Struck. In front of a full cabin. Flight attendants squirmed in their seats. A few looked down. Others shifted uncomfortably. One raised a hand. I would have stepped in. The facilitator nodded but asked calmly, "Then why didn't anyone else?" Silence. No one had an answer. Jonathan didn't need to stay for the discussion. He had already heard what mattered. They were being forced to face it. And in that discomfort, something new could grow. Back at school, Micah was settling back into a rhythm. The shock had faded. The stares had softened. The whispers still came now and then, but they no longer followed him like a shadow. What had changed wasn't the people. It was him. He noticed things now. Like the security guard at the convenience store who tailed another student for no reason. Or the father who made a subtle, loaded comment about certain kids being entitled. Those words didn't sting anymore. They didn't surprise him. They confirmed something he had learned on that flight. It was always there, just quieter, just hidden. But now he saw it, and with that awareness came something else. Power. At lunch, a younger student, a nervous seventh grader, approached his table. "Hey, I saw what happened. On the news." Micah turned to him. "I just wanted to say it was wrong." Micah gave a small smile. "Thanks." The kid shifted awkwardly. "People used to tell me I didn't look like I belonged in honors classes." Micah nodded. "Yeah, I get that." The boy looked down. "Sometimes I still wonder if they're right." Micah's voice was soft, but steady. "Don't let them make you forget you earned it." The boy smiled, then walked away. Micah didn't feel like a hero. He didn't feel like a symbol. He felt like someone who had been thrown into a storm and stayed standing. Someone who had learned how to walk through the rain without lowering his head. That evening, Jonathan returned home earlier than usual. Not from a PR event or executive summit, but from a board meeting where he had been offered an award. He turned it down. The organizers had called it a Leadership in Crisis Award. Jonathan had called it something else. "But they're trying to give me an award," Jonathan Hale said, sitting in the den beside Nora, his voice tinged with disbelief. "They want to congratulate me for fixing something I allowed to exist." Nora stirred her tea quietly. Her voice was gentle, but steady. "You didn't build the problem, Jonathan." "I didn't break it either," he replied. "But I didn't see it soon enough." She reached over, placed her hand over his. "You saw it when it mattered." Upstairs, Micah sat at his desk, sorting through school emails when one subject line made him pause. Subject: Equity and Voice, Student Forum Panel Invitation. He clicked it open. "Micah, we're organizing a student-led forum on equality, representation, and student voice. Your presence on the panel would bring real meaning to the conversation. We hope you'll consider it." He stared at the message for a while. Then he typed a simple response. "Yes, I'll be there." He hit send, leaned back in his chair, and glanced toward the window where soft moonlight fell across the floorboards. He thought about everything: the silence, the slap, the cameras, the way people looked at him and didn't speak. And then the moment came when the world finally stopped looking past him and started seeing him. Not because he shouted, not because he demanded it, but because he stood when it would have been easier to disappear. He closed the laptop. The world wasn't fixed, but it was finally listening. It was a bright Saturday morning. Micah and Jonathan sat side by side in a modest auditorium at the Hamilton Community Center. No stage lights, no banners, no corporate logos, just student-made posters, a few rows of folding chairs, and a cloth banner that read, "Voices That Matter." It wasn't a press event, but the room was full. Students, teachers, parents, even a few district leaders, some unsure of what to expect, but knowing they needed to be there. Micah had been quiet the entire ride. Jonathan hadn't pushed. He simply drove, sat in the front row, let Micah lead. When Micah's name was called, he stood. His hands were steady. His heartbeat was not. He wasn't used to microphones, wasn't used to being the one everyone looked at. But something had changed. He wasn't there to perform. He was there to tell the truth. Micah sat between two other students. One, a girl who'd been harassed in class. The other, a boy wrongly suspended. The moderator, a comp teacher named Mr. Hadley, asked the panel to share a time they felt powerless. Micah leaned toward the mic, looked at the audience, then down, then back up. "I was sitting in a seat my father paid for," he began. "My ticket was in order. I followed every rule. And still, I was pulled out. Still, I was hit." The room stilled. She didn't ask. She didn't check. She didn't try to find out if I was wrong. She just looked at me and decided. He paused, letting the silence stretch. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. But something happened that day. She made a decision about me, based on nothing but how I looked. He glanced around. For a while, I believed her. I believed maybe I didn't belong there. A few adults shifted in their seats. In the third row, Nora blinked back a tear. But then something else happened, Micah continued. People saw it. Not just what she did, but how everyone stayed silent. And when people started listening, I realized something. He took a breath. Being seen isn't enough. You have to be respected. A round of soft applause began, quiet but real. Micah's voice rose, not in volume, but in clarity. I'm not just talking about me. I'm talking about every kid in this room who's ever been told they're too loud, too bold, not polished enough. I'm talking about all the things that don't get recorded, but happen every single day. He scanned the room, locking eyes with students across the rows. If we don't talk about it, it keeps happening. If we don't tell the truth, it just hides better. He sat back. I'm telling mine. Because silence isn't strength. He finished. No standing ovation. No theatrics. Just honest applause. Not because he was Jonathan Hale's son, but because his story wasn't his alone. It belonged to all of them. After the panel, a line formed quietly at the edge of the stage. Not for photos, for conversations. One girl, no older than 13, stepped up. She was just a girl, barely 13, when she stepped quietly toward Micah after the forum ended. Her eyes were unsure but determined. My teacher says I talk too much, she said, voice barely above a whisper. But my brother talks even more, and she calls him confident. She looked at him with wide eyes. I didn't know how to explain why that felt unfair. Until today. Micah nodded. He didn't offer a speech. He just gave her the truth. Don't change, he said softly. Let them catch up. A small smile crept onto her face. And for a moment, that was enough. Not far away, Jonathan Hale stood with a quiet circle of school officials. One woman, wearing a pin that read Equity Office, watched Micah with something close to awe. Your son, she said carefully. He's got presence. Jonathan's eyes didn't leave Micah. He's got clarity, he replied. The presence came after. That night back home, Micah walked into his room and placed the small school badge from the forum gently on his desk. He didn't hang it up. He didn't take a picture for social media. He didn't even tell anyone what it said. He just kept it, quietly, like a reminder, like a promise. A few moments later, Nora knocked on his door, carrying a cup of cocoa. I heard what you said today, she said, setting the cup down beside him. Micah looked up, surprised. I didn't see you there. You were focused, she smiled. Like your father. You made people feel seen. Micah leaned back in his chair, his eyes thoughtful. Do you think she meant it? He asked suddenly. Nora paused. She didn't ask who he meant. She already knew. I think she meant it in the moment, she said. But what she does next, we'll decide if it meant anything beyond that. Micah nodded slowly. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't looking for revenge. But he would never forget that someone had looked at him, made a decision based on fear, and acted like that was normal. And now, with every quiet step he took, he was building something bigger. Not revenge, a path for the next kid who found themselves in seat 1A, so they wouldn't have to carry the weight of proving they belonged. Because they already did. A month passed. Spring stretched across the city, brushing color back into the trees. Blossoms opened along sidewalks. The wind grew warmer. Rooftops glowed under the setting sun. And for the Hale family, the season brought more than a change in weather. It brought clarity. Jonathan stood on the balcony of his office, the city humming beneath him. The skyline rose like steel poetry. Honking taxis, flashing signs. 1,000 lives moving all at once. But his mind wasn't on the view. It was on a photo glowing on his phone screen. It was Micah, on stage at the Forum, microphone in hand, his chin raised. Jonathan had looked at that picture a dozen times, not for pride, not to revisit a moment, but to remember. Because leadership wasn't just about steering companies or shaking hands. It was about owning the air people breathed in the spaces you created, making sure that air was clean, fair, safe, open. There was a soft knock at the door. His assistant stepped in, holding a file. "The final report for Flight 227, she said. "Ready for signature." Jonathan nodded. He took the file, flipped it open. At the top, closed case. Beneath it, a detailed summary. Disciplinary action, policy overhauls, retraining requirements, timelines. All of it official. All of it handled. But one line at the bottom, written by someone from Internal Affairs, caught his attention. Because one boy didn't yell back, thousands more will be treated right. Jonathan didn't smile. He just signed his name, closed the folder, and walked quietly to the elevator. Across town, Micah sat by his bedroom window, watching the orange glow of evening settle over rooftops. His headphones were off, his homework untouched. On his desk sat a plain white envelope. No return address, no logo. Just his name, written neatly in black ink. He had received it 2 days earlier. But tonight, he was ready. He opened it slowly, unfolding the letter inside. "Micah, I've watched the footage. I've read the articles. But none of them captured how calm you were, how strong. I want you to know, I'm not who I thought I was. I used to believe I was fair, that I followed the rules. But really, I only saw what I wanted to see. I've lost the job I worked for. But maybe that's fair. Because you lost something too. Your peace, your dignity, your trust. I hope you get all of it back. Dana Devlin." Micah read the letter once, then again, then a third time. He didn't feel pride. He didn't feel bitterness. Just a quiet stillness, and something close to understanding. He folded the paper carefully and slipped it into the drawer beside his bed. Downstairs, Nora was setting the table when Micah came into the kitchen. "Dad's home?" he asked. "Should be any minute now." Micah walked to the front window, peeking through the curtains just in time to see the black car pull up the driveway. The gate swung open, and Jonathan Hale stepped out. He looked lighter than he had in weeks. His jacket slung casually over one shoulder. His pace relaxed. That night, as they all sat at the dinner table, no one mentioned the flight. No one brought up the media storm. No legal teams, no press statements. They talked about the math test Micah had next week, about the baseball game on Saturday, about Nora's new cookbook and how the biscuits didn't rise right. Normal things. The kind of normal that had felt impossibly far away for a while. But now, it was back. As the plates were cleared, Jonathan looked across the table. "They added your name to the new crew handbook," he said quietly. "It's in the first section. What respect means on every flight." Micah blinked. "You didn't have to do that." "I didn't," Jonathan said. "The board did." He paused. "They said your actions reminded them that rules aren't just ink on paper, that silence has a cost." Micah looked down, his voice barely audible. "I still think about the moment she slapped me." Jonathan didn't flinch. "You always will." Micah nodded. "But it doesn't hurt the same anymore." Later, as the sky darkened from gold to deep navy, Micah stood in his room, backpack open. He reached inside and pulled out the Forum badge again. He didn't pin it to the wall. He didn't frame it. He just set it on his nightstand, where it would stay, because it meant something now. It meant that the boy in seat 1A, the one who had been told he didn't belong, had changed something, not by shouting, not by fighting fire with fire, not by demanding respect through noise, but by holding still, by letting the world see him, by refusing to disappear. and because of that stillness. Flight attendants now thought twice. Passengers remembered what silence felt like, and an airline rewrote the way it trained its crew, all because one boy stayed in his seat and taught the world what it meant to belong.